Hi, my name is Marty. I'm the president of HASCO Health and Safety Canada, and I wanted to review last year's new and young worker inspection blitz from the Ministry of Labour, and hopefully we can learn some lessons from last year. I'll give you some advice near the end of this video. It should be about 10 minutes or so. Every year from May 1st to the end of August, the Ontario Ministry of Labour Inspectors Blitz workplaces focusing on many different sectors, but specifically new and young workers, and they are aged 14 to 24. New workers are also those who are on the job less than 6 months and or assigned a new job in the last 6 months. And that point there, that piece of criteria, I'm not sure that everybody knows that, the relocation of a worker within inside of the company. So this is a two-part video. I'll review what happened last year and offer due diligence advice should your workplace be targeted this summer. I'll review the top infractions found while making 2,514 field visits last year to over 1,900 locations or companies. I've got a question for you. How many orders do you think were issued in total if they visited 1,901 locations? The answer is actually 7,675 orders were issued, and 116 of them were called stop work orders. A stop work order means exactly that you must stop doing whatever is deemed to be dangerous because you're going to hurt yourself or someone's going to hurt themselves. So the definition of a dangerous circumstance is where the act or regulations are being contravened or broken. The contravention itself poses an immediate danger or risk to the worker or others, and any delay in controlling that hazard may result in endangerment to the worker or others. So all three conditions have to apply for it to become a dangerous circumstance by definition. So here's an interesting statistic as well. The inspectors last year issued on average 4 orders per workplace visited. Now that's a little more than normal, probably 1 to 2 orders above average, what would be average. As I mentioned, they visited in 1,901 locations and issued over 7,600 orders. So what were they looking to do? The goals of the Blitz from last year were to raise awareness of different hazards. Hazards come from 5 different categories. They are people, equipment, material, environment, and processes. The second thing they looked for was just awareness of workers' rights and duties and responsibilities under the Act. So for all the employers listening here, please grab the green book and read in the Act, which is the beginning section, section 25 and 26. For all the supervisors out there, 27 is your number, and for workers, it's just a small amount of reading, very easy, section 28. With that being said, I think my personal opinion is that you should know all the duties and responsibilities of the people above you and below you. The other goals for the Blitz last year was to raise awareness of different hazards, like I said earlier, and help encourage employers to identify and control hazards. We use an acronym in health and safety called RACE: recognize the hazard, assess the hazard, implement a control for the hazard, then go back and evaluate that control of the hazard. The other goal was to increase workplace compliance with the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the regulations that are within it. Also to help to prevent injuries and illnesses that could arise from unsafe work practices. And the last goal from last year was to promote improved health and safety for new and young workers. Last year they focused on a bunch of different sectors, and they started with retail, which had the most orders, just over 2,300 orders for retail establishments. They visited restaurants, food, beverage, tobacco plants, tourism, hospitality and recreation facilities, wholesalers, wood and metal fabrication, industrial services like cleaners, landscaping companies, vehicle sales and services, chemical, rubber and plastic companies, and automotive subsectors, which actually had the fewest amount of orders with 117 orders in total. So this summer the ministry are going to focus on pretty much the same sectors, and they'll be out in full force doing that on July 15th through to the end of August. Now, 5 other points I want to make about their focus is that they're looking about training and orientation for new workers and existing workers that's provided by the employer. For example, using the supervisor, the Ministry of Labor's supervisor and worker awareness booklets. And in fact, if you want a copy, a PDF copy of that, I do have it. So just email me at marty@hasco.ca. And the other one, second area is the internal responsibility system. We call it the IRS. For example, they'll be looking at, do you have a functioning committee when you need to have a committee? And that would be when you have more than 20 or more employees, you need to have a functioning committee. So they'll want to see the meeting minutes to make sure you're having meetings and responding to recommendations and stuff like that. The other thing they'll be looking for companies that have 6 to 19 employees, a health and safety representative or an HSR. And that's important. We'll talk about that a little bit in a bit. The third point was workplace violence and workplace harassment. Now, they're not looking for fights. They're not going out looking to actually stumble across some violent situations. But what they'll look for is policies and procedures that people should follow in the event of that of violence or harassment. And just as of a year ago, I think it was a year ago, they added the words sexual harassment and sexual violence into the wording, into the language of the legislation. So those are included as well too. But the most important thing is not just having a policy and a procedure, but actually communicating that to workers. So that's an important point there. The fourth one is just checking for age of majority, making sure people can work that are working, and they're going to be focusing just on the industrial sectors for that. And then heat stress, obviously for the summer. Now, there is no top number in the Act. There's no legislation that specifically says when it gets to 38 degrees Celsius with a humidic factor of whatever, that it's time that you pull the people in from outside, or at least send them home, or give them breaks, or give them freezy pops, or whatever it is. There's no top end number. However, 35, 38 seems to be the place that people, in my experience. So one other thing to note is that the inspectors will also be focusing on workplaces that are newly registered with the WSIB. They'll have a list with them, and who have not had a proactive health and safety visit, such as a Blitz like we're talking about today, in the last 5 years. So if you're new, less than 5 years old, have never had a Minister of Labour knock on your door, this might be your time. Last year, inspectors took appropriate actions if they did find the violations that were found under the Act or the regulations. These included writing orders for employers, supervisors, and workers. Yes, workers could get charged, and no one else could get charged in a case. And also to make sure they're complying with legal requirements. And issuing stop work orders, like I said, there was about 116 written. Those are the ones that make you stop work right away, because someone's going to get hurt if we continue to go through with it. So here's my free advice. It's non-legal advice, so take it with a grain of salt if you wish. But let's review the orders from last year. I'll explain some easy solutions so that you can fall into compliance with the applicable legislations. And keep in mind that what I'm going to talk about happened last year, so it's probably going to happen again this year. And they do a number of different blitzes throughout the year. New and young worker is certainly not the only one. So in the first part, we'll talk about the charges under the Act. The next video that I'll post next month will be about the charges that relate under the Industrial Regulation 851, and that's the most widely applied workplace regulation in Ontario. So I've got another question for you. Do you know you could be charged under both the Act and a regulation? And that is true, you can be charged under both. Okay? Let's take a look at the orders, and I'll talk about some easy ways to circumvent this and completing your due diligence. These are in order for the fewest orders that they got last year during the new and young workers. So with 141 orders, get your green books out, look up section 8, subsection 6. It reads, by the way, unless otherwise required by a regulation or by an inspector, a health and safety representative, the HSR, shall inspect the physical condition of the workplace at least once a month. Now, my advice to you would be making sure that the members of the Joint Health and Safety Committee or the HSR inspect the workplace and document their findings. I've always said that to clients: if you do not document it, it's like it did not happen for the ministry. So make sure we document all of our findings during those, and it's proof that you've done it. If we do it and don't write it down or don't document it, we don't have the proof essentially it didn't happen. And also document the date, time, location, and any discussions that took place with workers along the way. If you turn to section 32, this is in part 3 of the Act, section 32.0.6. This is about workplace violence and harassment. Subsection 1 reads, an employer shall, in consultation with the committee and or a health and safety representative, HSR, develop and maintain a written program to implement the policy with respect to workplace harassment. So all employers in Ontario must create a policy regarding workplace harassment, including the definition of harassment, so people understand when they're receiving it or when they're giving it, when they're being harassers. They understand they're not supposed to do that. Give examples of harassment, not particularly name calling and local examples, but other examples that you can find. Actually explain what is not harassment. For instance, a supervisor just asking you to do work is not harassment because you don't like the job. And the steps to take if you are a victim. And finally, must tell the employees about the program and what's going to happen with the sensitive information that they may share with you. Okay, 172 orders were placed under the same section, but subsection 2, and it reads that policies for violence and harassment shall be written in written form. Can't be a verbal policy. A written form and shall be posted in a conspicuous place in the workplace. Conspicuous. So that means standing out so as to be clearly visible. Also attracting notice or attention. That's what conspicuous means. So where would we put it? Well, we would put it in the lunchroom, that's for sure. Employers must communicate the contents of this program, and if I were you, I'd make sure that everyone signs off on that review and that understanding of the policy, and any policy for that matter. Posted on the safety board, like I said, in the lunchroom, in the reception area. You know, the best place to generate a great impression, first impression with the Minister Labour Inspector, is posted inside the lobby so that they can see it there. Make sure it's got a recent date on it, no more than a year old. With 175 orders under the same section 32.0.1, subsection 1, clause C actually reads that an employer shall review policies as often as necessary, but at least annually. So at least as often as necessary usually does mean at least every year. However, there are situations where you might want to review your policy more frequently, and those would be after an incident of violence or harassment takes place, before a court case involving a worker, when the legislation changes is the best time, and also when you open a new office in a new province or territory. They may have different, and they will have different laws slightly about this. Continuing on this topic of violence and harassment, there was 1,429 orders of that 7,000 and change issued regarding violence and harassment, including no policy or program whatsoever. There's no excuses. This is 2006 when that came out. You have to have that, a policy and a program. If you need help with that, let me know. I've got some free resources that you can use. No training or explanation of the program to workers. So all that takes is an inspector asking a worker about the violence and harassment program. If the answer is we don't have one, it's not a good answer. Also, no assessment or a survey took place, as if it did, it would be only once a year. You would do a survey and you would say, ask employers anonymously on a form, you know, have you ever been harassed at work? If so, what did you do? Those sort of questions. Again, I can give you that survey if you connect with me. Under section 25, subsection 2, clause A in the Act, this 25 and 26, as I said earlier, was for the employer. There was 185 orders regarding providing information and instruction. So an employer shall or must absolutely provide instruction and supervision and information to the worker to protect their health and safety. So the information component, the instruction component of this would include training, development of policies, of procedures, safety talks by supervisors, documenting who attended them, and of course testing or quizzing on this knowledge. But for one thing is sure, you got to write this stuff down. When you do things, write it down and you won't get credit for it. It's not sufficient enough just to tell the worker what you want them to do. It has to be done in a written manner. Documented procedures increase consistency and quality anyway, so it lowers incident rates as well. Another thing about this clause, it was information instruction and providing supervision for workers. So workers must be provided with effective supervision by people that are competent. So the definition of competency in the Occupational Health and Safety Act for Ontario is a person who knows the job, they can organize the work and its performance. They're familiar with the laws as they apply, the Act and the laws as they apply to the work, and they can identify potential and actual hazards in the workplace. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I will tell you this, in my experience in training, certifying supervisors in management on this sort of thing, due diligence in the law, it's part B that they usually get caught up in, which is familiar with the law. They don't know what section, that it's 27 in the Act, that's where all their duties are. They don't know that. So that would deem them to be incompetent, because again, that's a full three-part definition. So let's talk about now the definition of the supervisor, which is a person who has charge of a workplace or authority over a worker. So if a group of people are leaving for a day job off-site, and you point to one of the workers and says, hey, I want you to be the supervisor today, or you're in charge, you now have all those duties, not only your own under Section 28 as a worker, but also 27 as the supervisor. The Ministry of Labour does not care what your company calls you if you're a supervisor. If they want to call you a lead hand or a team lead or some nice cushy title that doesn't really reek of supervisor, the ministry doesn't care. It's the action that you take, not your job title. Under Section 8 of the Act, subsection 1, it reads, this is about constructors and about committees and stuff. At a project or a workplace where there is no committee and where the number of workers regularly exceeds 5, so remember I said from 6 and up, the constructor or the employer, whoever, shall cause workers to select one person to be that health and safety representative. So last year, this means that the Ministry of Labour were knocking on doors, small businesses that had less than 20 employees, and they were asking to see the health and safety representative, and there was none set up. And this goes back a long way. Now, the requirement anyway, there still isn't a requirement from any training on this. So it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have training. This person has to do things that the committee does, and without having the training, they wouldn't understand. I'll explain that in a second here. So a safety committee is not required with less than 20 employees. However, if you have more than 5, you need to have that health and safety representative, the HSR again. Just like the worker rep on a committee has to be selected by the peers, you should keep that election process, the ballot boxes, everything, keep that to have proof that you did election, that it wasn't the boss hand selecting someone in a small business to be the health and safety representative, because the health and safety representative has to inspect the workplace monthly, conduct incident investigations, accident investigations, and meet with the owner regularly about OHS issues. And all this without having mandatory training. So I can help in that area. If you're interested, connect with me there. Under Section 25, again, that's for the employer of the Act, subsection 2, Clause H, it reads that, this is the big one for us in safety, an employer shall take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of the worker. Let me say that again. Section 25, 2H of the Act. An employer shall take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of the worker. That's every and reasonable. So you have to document and make notes on that. The law is used in the absence, this clause is used in the absence of something more specific. So if we can't find something, if the Ministry of Labour can't find anything in the regulations specific, they will go to this clause here. So consider it this way. If somebody gets hurt, there's likely somebody's at fault, and not necessarily the injured worker either. So they may use this clause. Sectors like landscaping who fall under Regulation 851 for an industrial establishment, while they're at their office, while they're commuting to the job site, but most of their job sites probably fall under Construction Regulation 213 at the job site. So if something happened midway, the ministry might use that clause. So if you were to ask me, hey Marty, is such and such law? If I can't think of a particular spot in the Act, then I'm going to probably point to 25 2H, the reasonable clause or due diligence clause. Again, in the area for employers, section 25, subsection 2, clause J, it reads that employers shall prepare and review at least annually a written occupational health and safety policy and develop and maintain a program to implement the policy. So your policy is just a one-page document that states about who's going to be protected, visitors, guests, including employees, and who's accountable for this, and how it always has to be signed by the top official on site. Make sure that you set an alarm in your Outlook calendar or something every year, whatever the calendar year or fiscal years that you're dating that the new person or the existing person, whoever's the highest, re-signs and redates that. And again, that's the first impression for the Ministry of Labor, right? Once you have the policy written, posted in that conspicuous location, what I talked about earlier, and there's nothing worse than the inspector walking in, seeing your health and safety policy laminated, even hanging on the lobby wall, and it's dated from 1979. That's not gonna work probably. Now the program, that was a policy. The program is all the other documentation that's related to health and safety, including testing and qualifications and certificates and that. Think of it as a big 3-ring binder, and all the tabs in the binder are going to be your significant hazards like lockout, tagout for controlling energy. Your maintenance people know about this. Lifting devices that are cranes and lift trucks, and even in healthcare for patients, right? The big one for every workplace is violence and harassment and bullying, right? So that would be a tab in your book, like vehicle safety if you have people driving a fleet of company vehicles. So those are good points to remember. Section 25, subsection 1, clause B, this is with 392 orders from last year. An employer shall ensure that the equipment, materials, and protective devices provided by the employer are maintained in good enough condition. So when I hear about stuff like that, I think about, well, what does the manufacturer say about the frequency of the oil changes or the changes of the components within the equipment? How often do they have to be checked? That kind of stuff. When I hear the word prescribed duties, it kind of means there's a reference to it in one of the regulations, or pull out a CSA standard, see if it's related to the topic at hand, right? And remember that if you purchase new or used equipment, speaking about equipment and devices, or even relocating an existing unit within the facility or to the adjoining building, you need to complete a pre-start engineering review and to make sure that the equipment meets our codes and standards here in Canada. In the Act, Section 25, Clause 2, subsection I, with 507 orders reads, an employer shall post in the workplace a copy of the Act and any explanatory material prepared by the Ministry of Labor in both English or French or the majority language, whatever that might be, outlining the rights, the responsibilities, and duties of all workers. English as a second language is not an out for safety. It doesn't mean it's not a free pass. It means we don't have to train those people just because they can't understand us. There's lots of help out there for resources. So for posting the Act, a copy of the Act should be affixed to your safety board. Make sure it says safety board at the top too, so it's clear that that's what it's there for, so all employees can access it. Members of the safety committee, the health and safety rep, management should probably have their own copies of the Act, so they have references to that. However, all of this is available online, very easy to download and print as well. Not a lot of color involved with it, it's just it'll print out like a PDF. So do not buy a copy of the Act every year. This is a question I get quite often, especially if nothing new applies. If you flip through the Act this year and you see grayed out areas, those grayed out areas are areas that they're looking at implementing next year. Regardless of when the book is printed, it could be coming out, it usually comes out in March. The laws that change, the new laws are effective as of the calendar year, January 1st. So make sure you have enough copies for people around, and actually make the copies look used. So spill some coffee on your copy of your Act so that when the Ministry of Labor comes by, it looks like you've used it before at least once. So I want to leave you with 4 points here. These are my final words of advice, overall general stuff that I've picked up over the last 14 years of doing this. One of the things that I stress at the very beginning of a management course or a supervisor due diligence course is if it's not written down, it did not happen. So document the good, the bad, the everything. All your discussions, what happened. Even when you pat someone on the back for wearing their safety glasses, I would want to make sure I have a documentation of that event so I can prove that I do that as well. as issue any kind of corrective actions. Point number 2, while controlling hazards, don't inadvertently create a new hazard by way of controlling an existing one. An easy example would be a ergonomic mat. Although they are beveled, I consider them to be a bit of a tripping hazard, so we're trying to ease the back and the discomfort of standing in one spot, but we're also creating a trip hazard, so be careful of that. My third point before I leave you is just because you're doing things a certain way right now, it doesn't mean that it's the safest way. And a clean record, no accidents, you know, I don't care how many lost time injuries your score clock says up there, it doesn't mean you haven't had an accident or an incident, and it doesn't mean that you're absolutely safe, right? So just because we have a clean record, if that's the case, we always want to vet or review our policies and procedures and make sure they're up to date at least annually, and document to get proof, to provide proof of that. And finally, I call the mindset, since we've had little to no safety issues, we won't have that in the future. I call that a false sense of compliance. I think there's a lot of companies out there that run according to a false sense of compliance, thinking that they're doing enough or doing the right thing, using the metric of no accidents as the defining factor of success, where it's got a lot more involved than that. And just finally, thank you for taking the time to read through, follow me on this video. Look next month in July for the follow-up video. We'll talk about Regulation 851. You can visit my company's website at www.hasco.ca, hasco.ca. Email me a question, marty@hasco.ca, or anything you have. You want a third opinion or a second opinion, call me. You can find me on LinkedIn. And of course, thank you very much, and happy Canada Day as well. Enjoy your long weekend and be safe out there. Play safe. Thanks. Bye for now.